My only regret is that we're not there in person, able to speak to you in person.
Yeah, so do I.
Emily, you're aware that this is on the record and being recorded?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, can I, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much indeed for coming today. We consider this a very important inquiry, and it would be unthinkable to do it without having a chance to have a conversation with yourself. Could I start with a fairly general question? What are your views about the direction which Hong Kong's going? Do you think one country, two systems is working and is sustainable?
Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you, although in such a way I was expecting to see you all in Hong Kong, and I was stunned by the Chinese government's reaction. Anyway, I think it is important that Parliament and, of course, the UK government take a close interest, because the UK signed the joint declaration 30 years ago. And I think, and I don't think I'm telling you anything new, but I think I speak for the vast majority of the Hong Kong people, that most of them felt that Britain never cared too much for us. And ever since the handover, and Britain did not pay much attention at all. Even before the handover, I think one famous expression often being quoted, I don't know whether it's said by some former prime minister, the future of Hong Kong is now behind us. So anyway, and I think many people feel that Britain has always been very eager to make money. And because you are a commercial nation, you want to trade, and some people would say that you don't mind selling us down the river so long as you can get rich and prosperous. And the thing is, I myself, of course, have never had any good feeling. And I just remind you the question, I was a journalist then, when I put to Maggie Thatcher 2 days after the signing of the joint declaration in December 1984. I was working for the Far Eastern Economic Review as their Hong Kong correspondent. I said, Prime Minister, 2 days ago you signed an agreement with China promising to deliver over 5 million people into the hands of a communist dictatorship. Is that morally defensible? Or is it really true that in international politics, the highest form of morality is one's own national interest? She, of course, was prepared for the question. And she said, what do you mean? Britain has done her best for you. We've done everything we could. And everyone in Hong Kong is happy with the agreement. Everyone is happy. And you may be a solitary exception. And if you remember George Orwell's 1984, you will probably recall that solitary exception is a definition for insanity. So in order to prove Maggie wrong, I got myself elected with a whopping majority in 1991, because that was the only time that the Brits and the Chinese agreed to allow Hong Kong to have elections to the Legislative Council in a very limited way, 18 out of 60. So I am no longer a solitary exception, and I speak for the vast majority of Hong Kong people who feel they've been let down by the British. Not that we wanted you to go to war with China over Hong Kong, like the Falkland Islands. I was in the UK at the time. I remember you people, Sir Anthony Kershaw, saying, we have to defend the Falkland Islanders because they are kith and kin. But Hong Kong, wow, Hong Kong is different. Hong Kong's situation is unique. No, we never asked Britain to go to war. You don't need to have the Atlantic Conveyor and others to go to war with China. But we think you should have given us democracy. So when you had talks with China, in the late 70s and early 80s, it would have been tripartite negotiations, like negotiations over the Falkland Islands. You never gave us representative government. There was no one to represent Hong Kong. So only the British and the Chinese government engaged in secret negotiations, which ended up with the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And then when you decided to hand Hong Kong back to China, there were more than 3 million people out of the 5 million odd who are British citizens. But Parliament passed a series of laws, including those in the early 1980s, to downgrade us to become British Dependent Territory citizens, and then later BNO, British National Overseas. And I tell you what Hong Kong people say that stands for. BNO stands for Britain says no.
And how do we feel about whether one country, two systems is working?
Well, I don't think it's working very well, and I don't know whether you people have seen this white paper, which was published by Beijing on the 10th of June this year.
Yes, we have
a white paper. Yes, it's on the practice of one country, two system policy in the Hong Kong SAR. And there are many parts which upset and anger Hong Kong people a lot. And such as on page 9, it says the central government exercises overall jurisdiction over Hong Kong. And people say, wow, where does this leave our high degree of autonomy? Overall jurisdiction. And then if you turn to page, it's about the judiciary, which is very, very close to our heart. Page 46, independent judiciary, independent legal system, the rule of law is a very precious British legacy. We've never had democracy. We still don't, but we had the rule of law. People are equal before the law, and the judiciary is very independent, so is the legal profession. We are very proud of that. But what did China say in the white paper? China lumped the judges together with all the administrators of Hong Kong, the executive authorities, and said that judges must be patriotic and they must love the country and have this basic political requirement, and then they are part of the political elites who run Hong Kong. I mean, this is crazy. The judges are not part of the executive authorities. The Chinese got this wrong. And furthermore, many of the pro-Beijing politicians here knew nothing about this white paper until a few hours before it was published. And they actually blushed when they saw these mistakes. So anyway, so one country, two systems is under tremendous stress, and people are very worried that we will, I don't know when we'll have democracy. Yes, sir?
But thank you for that. Have you actually had a chance to meet the protesters? What's your opinion of what they're up to in their campaign?
You're talking about the umbrella movement?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. I'm one of the protesters, and I was arrested too last Friday. And I was actually arrested twice.
Sorry, I should rephrase that. You asked me a question about the umbrella movement. I meant the student protesters. What is your view of the student protesters?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the student protesters are there together with all the other protesters from different ages. So it is difficult, and I don't think it would be wise to separate them. But of course, it's true to say that many of the protesters are young people. And that's why the whole thing is so captivating. But they are all together. But of course I met the student protesters. I had a meeting with them yesterday. But we are all in it together, in the movement. Yes?
Yeah. So you completely align yourself.
What is your question?
Well, I'm just trying to establish that you align yourself completely with their position.
Not completely. I support peaceful and non-violent demonstration. Yeah. So if there are protesters, young or old, who advocate confronting the police, trying to jostle with them to try to break up property, I do not support them, and we refuse to take part in such actions. But we're still together, fighting together, and hope that one day democracy will prevail.
I think your position is completely understandable. Mike Gates.
Yes, thank you. Very good to see you again. Many years ago, I came to Hong Kong with the Foreign Affairs Committee in the 1990s. Can I ask you, now that the umbrella protests, the street protests have been effectively ended, what does that mean for the political reform process? Where is that likely to go?
Well, you, I'm sure, are familiar with the decision of the National People's Congress Standing Committee made on the 31st of August. And that was the origin of the protests, because people feel that under such a structure provided by the NPCSC, there is no way that a democratic electoral system will come out of it. So that's why the people were so angry. And they were angry because China, Beijing itself, had promised us that we could have a direct election of the CE in 2017. So, but Beijing has said many times that decision will not be, changed. And they also said that maybe early next month they will start the second round of consultation. That is to see how they can implement the National People's Congress Standing Committee's decision. But my party and other pro-democracy parties have said we will boycott the second round of public consultation because we don't think it will lead to anything meaningful. Even if you read your Foreign Secretary's report to Parliament in July, which sum up the first 6 months, he referred, Mr. William Hague, he referred to the fact that it should have genuine choice for the voters. And we all know what genuine choice means, yes?
If you are boycotting this process, does that mean that you don't believe it's possible that there will be any compromise or improvements of the current proposal? Or do you think that actually a tactic of boycotting might lead to something better than participating?
Well, one way or the other. If something good can come out of it, and the test is very simple, because they say Beijing's decision is only a framework, and they will fill in the details. And if they are able, by filling in the details, to show the whole world that they can still come up with an electoral system which would give voters genuine choice, I think my party would be very happy to have a very good look at it. Because some of them are saying, hey, don't say no so soon, because, it is possible. I said, I don't think it is possible, given the structure, but if it is, come out with it. Nobody is saying that you shouldn't.
I understand that if the final package that will be proposed from Beijing will require the approval by 2/3 majority of LegCo.
That's right.
Do you think that is likely? And what is the implication if LegCo says no?
Well, I don't think they will get 2/3 majority. The 2/3 majority is provided for in the basic law. Oh. And I don't think they will get it. And if they don't get it, that means it's voted down and the electoral system will remain unchanged. That means a committee of 1,200 will elect the chief executive like they did in March of 2012.
Isn't that worse than even a modest reform from your point of view?
Well, you have to remember, this is a promise by Beijing to Hong Kong that we can elect the chief executive by universal suffrage in 2017. And now, of course, they insist this is universal suffrage because it's one person, one vote. And forget about the fact that people are not free to nominate and you just have a free to vote. You're not free to stand, you're not free to nominate, you're free to vote. But I don't think that is universal suffrage. And for us to support it, that means we are supporting a big lie. And tell the people, hey, this is genuine democracy, when it is not. How can we, hand on heart, tell such a lie?
Okay, thank you very much.
Sandra.
Hello Emily, my name is Sandra Osborne. I'm a Scottish MP. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office in its last 6-monthly report said that the rights and freedoms protected in the Joint Declaration are being upheld. What do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think so. Well, now, first of all, we don't have the political freedom, the right to elect our government. And one also very important freedom is the freedom of the press. And I speak as a former journalist. I noticed yesterday you talked to Mr. Fenby. I used to work in the same organization as Mr. Fenby, the South China Morning Post. I, of course, also work for BBC in London. I work for Newsnight. And if you look at the journalistic scene here, you will see that many journalists are under tremendous pressure, and they are very poorly paid, but they are very dedicated. But they are under a lot of pressure from their employers, and also, of course, from the Chinese and the Hong Kong government. So there is very heavy self-censorship, and the government, of course, use all kinds of means to put pressure on the media by excluding them from certain government briefings, by putting obstacles in their way of covering government activities, and some of them are not allowed to go to mainland China to cover Hong Kong events that are happening across the boundary. And I, of course, speak as someone who's been banned by the Chinese government from traveling to mainland China for more than 20 years. In our Legislative Council, which has 70 members, at least 7 have been banned for more than 20 years. So we can come to the UK, we can go anywhere, but we cannot go to mainland China. And on some occasions, we can't even go to Macau because they also ban us. So the freedom of travel, but the press freedom is under tremendous pressure. And if you read reports compiled by the Hong Kong Journalists Association, they will give you a very good catalogue of all the things that happen. There was a debate in the council, I think earlier this year, when a Ming Pao senior editor was not hacked to death, but was severely attacked. And we had a debate on protecting press freedom. And I move an amendment listing at least 12 or 15 incidents of vicious attacks on journalists in the past 5-10 years. And in fact, the majority of those attacks took place after Mr. C.Y. Leung became chief executive in June of 2012. And the thing is, most of those attacks were never detected. So I said, what message are we sending out to the community? Go ahead and hit them, kill them. Nobody will come after you. I think this is really terrible. It's a very vicious signal. But I think, thank God, we still have all these brave men and women who still want to work in journalism for such low pay and long hours and heavy pressure. And when they go to China, mainland China, some of them get beaten up. And the Hong Kong government and their employers did not stand up for them. So this is a very sorry saga.
We had a very interesting conversation with the journalists. You've said that the UK has a moral obligation to ensure the effective implementation of one country, two systems. Now, you've already told us your views about the past negotiations and the UK's role, which you see as disappointing. What do you think the UK could realistically do now to ensure that the one country, two systems is more effectively implemented?
Well, I think you should look at the joint declaration and see what is it that is Britain's responsibility. There was a question asked in the Legislative Council yesterday about the effectiveness of the joint declaration, or whether it is now a void. And then the minister who answered the question, his Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Mr. Raymond Tam, he said the provisions of the Joint Declaration have been fully implemented and its purpose and objectives have also been fully fulfilled. He said the UK has no sovereignty, no jurisdiction or right of supervision over Hong Kong, and there is no such thing as moral obligation. But my question is, you've signed an agreement. This is an agreement between Britain and China. If China now come out and say, oh, no more, and many papers today in Hong Kong say, oh, the Joint Declaration is history. It has no role to play. But my question is it possible to have a breach of the Joint Declaration, like a breach of any agreement? Because they promised us 50 years of freedom, free lifestyle, 50 years after 97, have a capitalist lifestyle. What if suddenly, in 2 years' time, Beijing said, okay, now it's one country, one system. You have our socialist lifestyle. Would that be regarded as a breach? And if that is a breach, and I'm sure that's not the only possible breach of the Joint Declaration, do you think Parliament, do you think the UK government should do something?
Yeah.
We are.
Yes. That's why we're having this. That's why we're having this inquiry. Thank you.
John Byrne.
Thank you.
Mr. Lau, some of us, indeed many of us, are concerned about the UK government's perhaps lack of robustness with regards to what is happening in Hong Kong. The fact that this committee has been refused entry is almost unknown. And the response from the FCO to this, I think, illustrates our wider concerns. I think the strongest terminology that we could get out of the FCO was regrettable. And given that it was said to the Chinese ambassador who formerly had served in North Korea, I mean, he must have been shaking in his boots hearing that from the FCO. Can I ask you, as somebody who's not been allowed to travel to the mainland for 20 years, as I understand it, because of your pro-democracy credentials in Hong Kong, the FCO has asserted that the White Paper did not mark a substantial shift in China's policy towards Hong Kong. You've quite categorically condemned, or said that the UK should be condemned for taking that position, or believing that. Can I ask you, why have you said that for our records here? And more importantly, perhaps, what do you think the UK government should now do going forward, given that there are those within the FCO who believe that the room for manoeuvre, the levers of influence, are somewhat limited?
Well, I think the White Paper and also the things that the Chinese government have been up to have sent shivers down the spines of many Hong Kong people who feel that, their aspirations for democracy and human rights are not being met and, in fact, are being threatened. And some people, when we march, they actually take out the colonial flag, which of course upset Beijing no end. But I think on one occasion I was told that the colonial flag was so popular that the printer actually had to work overtime to produce many, many copies so that the people can carry them when they march. And so people say, well, why do they carry that flag? I think they are just reminding themselves of something which may be better. Maybe, I use this word. But it shows you grave dissatisfaction with the current situation. And I mean, colonial rule, of course, was no good. I never supported it. But after the change of sovereignty and we're no longer a colony, and with the promises in the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, the people rightly look to better days in which we will actually progress towards democratic government and our rights and freedoms would be fully protected. But now, as I told you, press freedom is not, and also the freedom of assembly, freedom of marching and so on are also being threatened. So people just think that it is, things are not going in the right direction. But the UK government and the Hong Kong British Consulate have been very, very quiet. And I think that, as I told you at the very beginning of this session, many Hong Kong people, and in fact not just Hong Kong people, actually many people in the international community, and I travel quite widely, and they often tell me that the Brits are mainly concerned about making money and looking after their own commercial and maybe their own political and diplomatic interests, and would really have quite little time for tiny little Hong Kong. And so I guess maybe we should not just blame the FCO. I don't know if you ask yourself what Parliament has done, what the House of Commons or the House of Lords have done or said about Hong Kong in terms of giving us support. Some people will say, oh, well, I won't do it because China would accuse us of interfering in Chinese affairs. But I think Britain has a right to comment because you are signatory to the Joint Declaration. And furthermore, human rights issues, they transcend national boundaries. We should all speak out when there are atrocities and human rights violations happening anywhere over the world. But sadly, UK government and many of your allies have spoken to me, and they ask me, they say, why should I speak out if the Brits are so quiet? So I don't think I'm telling you something you have never heard, but anyway, I think that is I would not accept that it is just this FCO, certain people there dictating such policy, but it's a policy which probably is quite widely shared or at least connived at by members of Parliament. And now that you people have been banned, it seems you people are doing nothing. I think in the US. The US Congress, they pass laws at the drop of a hat if there's a consensus. And if people ban them, what do? They pass a law to ban them back. So I don't see you people doing anything. Some say, okay, if they ban you, at least you should ban the NPC delegates from Beijing or from China.
Well, can I assure
you never consider that?
Can I assure you, I'm sure it has been considered, but can I assure you that this committee role is to scrutinise, particularly the FCO, but by implication the government, and we are very much concerned about what's happening in Hong Kong, and this is why we are, or one reason we are conducting this inquiry, and we will not be afraid to be critical if the consensus view of the committee is to come to that conclusion. Can I just bring you back, though, to some of the questions we have, if I may? A view that Britain's position on this is somewhat weakened by the fact that we never introduced democracy when we were in control prior to the handover. And therefore, it is a little cheeky of us to actually then insist that the Chinese do so. Now, that's not, I don't think, what you're saying. What you're saying is there are joint signatories to a treaty, in effect, and both sides should honour them. But what would you say to our critics and those within the FCO who sometimes come out with that line?
Well, I think you are, of course, in a very weak position, and hence my question to Maggie Thatcher in December of 1984. But when people always say that to me, I would say the fact that we didn't have democracy then doesn't mean we shouldn't have it now. And but in the case of the UK, I think first of all you have to come out and to act, to apologise, to be contrite and say it was wrong for previous parliament and government not to implement democratic elections in Hong Kong. And in fact, I moved a bill in the council in 1994 for a fully elected council, and I was defeated by one vote. And Chris Patten was very instrumental in making sure that my bill was defeated. He proposed a drop of democracy, which was quite pathetic. Anyway, so I think you have to come out and say we were wrong. Britain was wrong in the past. And now we can see that the Hong Kong people, many of them, many young people, would like to have democratic elections. But what is more, it is something that has been promised by Beijing. Is nobody foisting something on Beijing? So we just hope that they would carry out that promise. And as for universal suffrage, there is an international definition, and it does not only include one person having the right to vote, the right to stand for election, the right to be nominated as a candidate should also be free and fair. So these are four fair comments that you people can make, but you seem to be so shy. And I noticed William Hague had the right word, saying genuine choice. But Prime Minister Cameron, he said proper choice and real choice. Somehow those words, genuine choice, cannot come out of his lips. I don't know why. I hope the Parliament, the FAC, can come up, in a very straightforward manner to say what needs to be said.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. There is a concern that you are right that we are allowing trade considerations to influence our view on things here, and that is why perhaps we are a little bit too quiet about these issues. Could I ask you, Ms. Lau, could you summarise where you think the joint declaration has been breached that we could certainly point to as a country? If we were sitting and suggesting to the FCO where they should be speaking out, where would you highlight? What are the key issues as far as you're concerned? And perhaps after that, could you explain what you think Britain now, looking forward, should be doing about it? Should we be beating the table, thumping the table about this? And do you think it would have any effect?
Well, I think now, because the joint declaration does not have such specific things on election, but it does say that it would, guarantee our free lifestyle, the rule of law. And if you talk to people here, the lawyers and the other political activists, the students, they will tell you that all the freedoms that we cherish are under tremendous stress. So maybe it's not the point to say that, the JD has been breached, but we say that it is going down in that wrong direction. And we are very, very worried. And even with such a situation, I think the UK government can comment on the developments, the fear of the Hong Kong people, the concern that if such thing continue to develop in that direction, it may lead to a breach one day. And that would be very serious. And plus the fact that if they now say the joint declaration is null and void, it is just part of history, I don't think that is something that should be accepted. So I think these disturbing developments must be, you people should comment on them and have a position. And of course, even though you care about trade, and I hope you won't get me wrong, I am all in favor of people trading with China and trading with Hong Kong. I love for the whole world to come and invest in China and Hong Kong. So I think you can do everything, not just saying, if I talk loudly about Hong Kong, then we will not trade. No, you can. But of course, China may say, if you do that, I won't trade with you. But the Chinese premier was in UK recently, Mr. Li Keqiang, and I don't know how many millions of pounds of contract, hundreds of millions of pounds of contract he brought with him. So I think sometimes you have to pay a price. I was in Norway 2 months ago, tiny little Norway. They gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Chinese dissident Liu Xiaobo 2 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago. And China has been punishing them ever since. And when I arrived at Norway, the day China announced some more ban on the sale of salmon, And I met the Foreign Office people there, and they look a bit unhappy. So, I mean, there are ways that China would use to punish you. So for everything you do, there are consequences, my dear friends. And if you are so unwilling to take any of the consequences, then you will take something on your conscience.
You will. I don't know how closely you follow proceedings in the House of Commons, Mrs. Lau, but we've already raised this issue as a committee on the floor of the House of Commons. And many of us have expressed concern not only about what China is doing, but more specifically about the lack of response by the FCO. And this committee is looking at this very issue now. So I'm afraid you're going to have to wait to see how we conclude our investigation into this matter. But I can assure you this committee has in the past been very outspoken in its criticisms, and we will continue to be so if we think it merits it. Can I just come back, though, to, if I may, to one... Yes. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Yeah. No, okay. To one final question, if I may, Ms. Lau. There is a view also that by banging the table, and I'm putting this view to you, doesn't mean we necessarily agree with it, but we have to look at both sides in coming to hopefully a balanced report. Then in banging the table, we may be making life more difficult for the protesters in Hong Kong, because what we don't want is China acting in an irrational way. Do you think there's any chance of that?
Any chance of China acting in an irrational way?
In an irrational way. If Britain was to suddenly bang the table very loudly and make a fuss on the international stage and say, look, this is an international treaty that has basically been broken by the Chinese, and we have a moral obligation to bring this to light, as far as we're concerned as the co-signatory. What effect would this have, do you think, in Hong Kong itself? Would there be a backlash within Hong Kong itself?
Well, not on the Hong Kong people, maybe a backlash on the British government. And but so what? If certain things you have to do, then you have to do them. But if you are so frightened, and well, if I do this, China would do that, and you may act the same way with Syria, with Russia, with all the other, people out there, with ISIS. So are you telling me that because of possible backlash, you would refrain from taking action that you think should be taken? Is that what you are telling me?
No, can I put your mind at rest? I cannot speak for everybody on the committee, but I certainly am not concerned about the backlash. But what I would say is thank you for your time and thank you for your bravery in standing up for democracy in Hong Kong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I take you back to your previous remarks about the position being taken by the British government? Part of our purpose in holding our inquiry is to examine and scrutinise the role of our own government and its representatives. What contacts do you have with the UK government representatives in Hong Kong? And have you recently had discussions with them about what's been happening over recent months?
I would not say I have frequent contacts with them, but every now and then either the Consul General or sometimes her staff would meet with me. And a few weeks ago, there was a visitor from the Foreign Office, and so the Consul General invited 7-8 legislators from different political parties to have dinner in her residence. And but I have told the consulate people time and time again, I think their 6-monthly report to Parliament is very weak and not really stating things as they are. They don't have to criticize. All they need to do is to quote the people in the community who are making accusations or criticisms. but the reports are very tame. And then I've often encouraged MPs who in those days were still allowed to come to Hong Kong, and I encouraged them to have debates in Parliament, but they never did. So that's why I told you at the beginning, we just have a feeling that either members of Parliament or the UK government just couldn't care less.
Can I ask you, when you raised your criticisms with the representatives in our consulate and representatives of the British government officials, what was the response that you got?
Not much response. They just noted my view. They would not argue with me.
Okay.
Well, actually, many people do argue with me. You may not believe it.
Thank you very much.
And on that cheerful note, can we thank you very much indeed for your time. You've given us a different perspective on the whole thing, and it's really appreciated. So on behalf of the committee, a big thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope to see you in Hong Kong.
Okay, or in London.
Yes.
Okay, bye-bye.
You muted.
搞掂，唔該。好，搞掂。好啦，我走啦嚇，第二個啦。
你使唔使有冇司？使唔使幫你講司機？
冇地，邊有司機都冇車㗎我搭的士㗎咋，得㗎啦。
好多人啊，
唔係的士，搭地鐵，我得㗎啦。
慢慢唔講
阿梁生未到，
係
好得啦，我執嘢，我要翻去我個 debate 仲開緊嘅。
係啊，阿李議員嚟唔到啊都。
佢話咗啊？點解？佢真係唔得。
係啊，佢話因為係講勞工問題。
哦，佢唔行得開。
係啊。
冇辦法。
唔好漏嘢喎嚇，唔好漏嘢。
唔會漏。
手機係。
攞晒嚇，攞晒。
慢慢啦，你。
我又想去洗手間。
你呢邊要兩個。
好。去過㗎啦，唔該你嚇。
唔好意思，可唔可以俾多啲有汽水？哦，咁有佢，係。好啊，唔該。 唔係佢而家仲係唔知唔聽電話。
唔緊要啦，或者佢唔知㗎啦。拜拜。真係慘，不過覺得晒。唔該，拜拜。下次見啦，劉議員，好麻煩，拜拜。
Hello everyone. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I think the next one is on his way, and Mr. Alan Leung is on his way to come. So would you mind to wait a couple minutes?
No, okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
but for your information, the last one, Mr. Lee Chut-yan, we swapped with Mr. Summer. He can't attend, so Team Summer will be the last one, okay?
All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
so Mr. Lee is unable to come, so Mr.
All right,
Summer
got
will be
it.
the last one, okay? I'm going to
Yeah.
call him right now and see where he's in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, 梁議員，你喺邊啊，梁議員？得，冇問題。OK， 我喺門口等你啊。88樓，冇錯，我喺門口㗎啦。拜拜。係啦，Hello, Mr. Leung is on. Hello, Mr.
Yep.
Leung is on his way. He will be here in 1 minute, okay?
All right. Okay, thank you. Hey, are you Vivian?
I am Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
I'm Vivian. Hello, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you all.
You played a better day.
OK。
斟杯水俾你，梁議員。
好啊，
邊支啊？暖水。
啊，得啦，誒就
OK
啊，
係 room temperature 嘅。
哦得啦，
OK，係啦，你坐低係啦，Auntie OK 嘛
睇下啲書嘅。
？OK，係啦。OK。
It's unmuted. Can you hear us?
OK。
The picture's gone.
Loudly and clearly. Loudly and clearly. Yes.
Wait a minute. Let's get a bit more volume. Any better?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Unfortunately, the picture's breaking up a bit, which I suspect is nothing to do with you. But can you see us all right?
Yes, I can. I can. Yes.
Well, Alan, thank you very much indeed for coming along today. It's really appreciated, and I'm only too sorry that we're not there in person and we're not looking at you across the table at the moment.
Not your fault.
Exactly not. Alan, are you aware that this is being recorded and this is an on-the-record conversation?
I do not expect otherwise.
Very good, thank you. Thank you. Can I turn straight away then to the Foreign Office, as you know, does a report every 6 months. That's the British Foreign Office on the
Yes.
bilateral relationship and the situation in Hong Kong. They actually say that quite consistently that the one country, two systems is working well and that rights and freedoms protected in the joint declaration are being upheld. Do you agree with that assessment?
Not entirely. You see, when one country, two systems as a concept was first floated in Hong Kong in the late 1980s, and when we got to read the basic law when it was promulgated in 1990, 4th of April, we all have expected that Hong Kong would enjoy a high degree of autonomy, and except in foreign affairs and matters of defense, we would have our own say in what would happen and what should happen. But now, at least after the white paper, do you know what I'm referring to? The
Yes.
white paper,
Yeah.
yes, published by the State Council of the Central People's Government a few months ago, we learned for the first time that in fact what we have always believed as our autonomy was subject to the Central People's Government's approval. And unless they approve of what we are going to have, we basically would have nothing. And of course, you must have been briefed on the reaction, very strong reaction in Hong Kong about the reference of the white paper to judicial officers being part of the government, in a sense that the judiciary would be expected to cooperate with the executive. And that, of course, worried us a lot, because that would suggest that the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law might be jeopardized if that concept is to be pursued. And the same man who was behind the white paper, Mr. Zhang Rongsun, just a few days ago, over the weekend, spoke in Shenzhen about Hong Kong people need to be re-educated on our understanding of the one country, two systems concept, and also the basic law as to how it ought to have worked. So I think it seems that the Central People's Government and the Communist Party now want to redefine one country, two systems in the way that they would like it. And this is what really makes Hong Kong people very anxious.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very helpful. I understand that you're the vice chairman of the Independent Police Complaints Council. Are you happy with the way the Hong Kong police handled the recent protests?
Oh, a point of clarification first. I am not the incumbent serving vice chairman.
Okay.
I was vice chairman, I think, until 2007. So
right.
that was about 6-7 years ago. But I, of course, as a legislator, have been keeping keen watch on this watchdog called IPCC. And in fact, that piece of legislation that now makes the IPCC a statutory body was passed by the legislature while I was a legislative councillor. So I have a good understanding of the working of the IPCC. So maybe you would allow me in that capacity or with that background to answer your question.
Yeah.
The IPCC, since its inception in the mid-90s, depends for its effectiveness on public's confidence in this body. Since its inception, the IPCC had been chaired by a Queen's Counsel or a senior counsel after the reversion of sovereignty to China. But the most recent appointee as chairman of IPCC is a member of a provincial. I think he is not what are they called? The Central People's Consultative Committee, whatever.
I get the drift.
Yeah, he is not on the national level. I think this chap is appointed, who is appointed chairman of IPCC, is a provincial level representative of this consultative body. So by definition, and also by appearance, of course, he is a Central People's Government's man, a pro-establishment man. He is not a senior counsel, he is a solicitor. And also, during the recent Occupy Central campaign, there had been a lot of infighting amongst IPCC members themselves. A few of the IPCC committee members are legislators of the Pan-Democratic Camp. I think there are at least a couple of them. And the pro-establishment IPCC members were pointing an accusing finger at this pan-democratic background IPCC members and said they ought not to be allowed to deliberate on all those complaint files that had anything to do with the umbrella movement or the Occupy Central campaign. So in a way, like many other statutory bodies and consultative bodies, after the reversion of sovereignty to China, there has been a change in their constitution. So whenever a vacancy comes up for reappointment, you would expect that people who are considered belonging to the pro-establishment, pro-Beijing camp would be appointed, even not in entirety, in numbers that would overwhelm appointees who are more liberal and generally accepted as belonging to the more liberal faction of civil society. So that, I think, is a general observation that many in Hong Kong would agree to.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, thank you. We've had several sessions of evidence already in this inquiry, and one of the things that has come out is that there is a view which has been expressed to us that the pan-democratic parties are somewhat distanced from the recent umbrella movement and student protests. Is that an accurate view?
Well, you must know that this umbrella movement started with student boycott of classes, both in secondary schools and mainly in universities. And on the 28th of September, there were 87 shells of tear gas being fired at the demonstrating crowd. Now, so the whole movement was if you like, a self-motivated movement without any leader. It is not a movement that is planned by an activist group or planned by a political party. So being a spontaneous mass people's movement and led or had its genesis in students' boycott, very naturally, the student bodies who led the class boycott had been leading the movement, at least for the first half of it. I think when we were into the fifth to sixth week of the movement, that is after the occupation had been there for 5 to 6 weeks, we were then able to form a 5-way platform. The 5 ways included the Pan-Democrats, the 2 student bodies, the Scholarism and the Hong Kong Federation of Students, and then we have the Occupy Central Trio, and lastly, the 5th way, so to speak, would be the civil society, NGOs and activists. So when we were into the 5th to 6th week of the occupation, we formed this platform, this 5-way platform, but from start to now, this platform was never meant to be a decision-making body. But we met every now and then so that we would know what the other parties, other stakeholders in this platform plan to do. So that, I think, described what in actual fact happened during the occupation. The students, by many of the polls done during the occupation, they were treated by the occupiers as having led the movement, and they were the two bodies that the occupiers would be most prepared to listen to. But the Pan-Democrats, since our involvement after the 5th to 6th week of the occupation, we were able to maintain a good working relationship with the students. And in fact, when the occupation in Harcourt Road was cleared last Thursday, it was done in a very peaceful and orderly manner without any violence. And I would argue that that result had been procured by the joint efforts of this platform, because the students were prepared more to listen to some of our ideas, and eventually we were able to at least bring the Occupy movement to a relatively more respectful or respectable stage-wise ending.
Thank you. I take it from what you've just said then that you personally have been involved in these discussions and that you've met with some of the,
yes,
the demonstrators and student leaders?
Yes. In fact, the Pan-Democrats were represented by me on the platform. Yeah. In fact, at the peak of the movement, we met 2 to 3 times in a day, a single day. So so I have a personal knowledge and understanding of how this platform worked.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I understand that the legislative package for electoral reform proposed for Beijing, which is due to be produced in the next few weeks, would ultimately require a 2/3 majority to be passed by LegCo. We've been told earlier by Emily Lau that the democratic groups are going to boycott this process, not take part. If that is the case, when these proposals do come forward, would you expect them to be an improvement on what you fear? And if they are put forward, do you think that LegCo would be likely to vote with a 2/3 majority for those proposals? And if that doesn't happen, what are the implications?
Well, first of all, I have to explain to you why the 31st August resolution of the NPC, National People's Congress Standing Committee, was so unacceptable to the Pan-Democrats. In a nutshell, what that resolution amounted to was to tell Hong Kong people that you would not be able to have a real choice. Because when that resolution of the NPCSC is put to practice, that practically would mean that the only political party that can nominate candidates for election to the office of chief executive would be the Chinese Communist Party and no party else, you see. And this is what makes Hong Kong very worried. We know from the word go that we are a small part of a authoritarian regime. We know that from the word go, right? Because my country actually practices what is called the unitary power system. At the top of it would be the National People's Congress, and we know that from the word go. But we sought consolation from the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which was subsequently given effect to by the Basic Law, and all the promises enshrined in the Basic Law itself. So, you see, the white paper, together with the 31st August resolutions of the NPC Standing Committee, so nakedly told Hong Kong people that that is what we had believed for a quarter of a century would no longer hold true. Well, you would not enjoy the high degree of autonomy that you had always believed or trusted that you would be able to, etc. Now, so that explains why we are so against the 31st of August resolution of the NPC Standing Committee and the white paper that preceded it. To coming back to answer Mike's question, the Pan-Democrats had already pledged a few months ago by signing on a pledge in black and white that any electoral model designed with the restraints of the NPC Standing Committee's decision or resolutions of 31st August, we must vote it down. So we are standing by that pledge. You see, if the Hong Kong SAR government insists on designing an electoral model for the 2017 chief executive election, but without moving an iota from the NPCSC resolutions, then we would have no reason to support it. And theoretically, after the vetoing of the electoral model moved by the SAR government, the Central People's Government could start once again from step one in the 5-step process, you see. Starting again with a chief executive's report to the NPC, SC, and NPC-SC can then make another new resolution. Now, but of course I'm not very optimistic about that happening. So the result of our vetoing the 2017 electoral package could mean that Hong Kong would be more and more ungovernable. Now, Hong Kong, I would argue, is already ungovernable now with C.Y. Leung at the helm. But if the 2017 electoral model does not give us any hope that there could be meaningful changes that would give us some hope that we would have a say in our government and who is governing us, then I can see that Hong Kong will definitely become not governable. I am not the only person who takes this view. In fact, quite a number of very senior and seasoned politicians from the pro-establishment camp also openly hold this view. One of them is, of course, the president of the Legislative Council, Honorable Jasper Zhang. He said for many, many times now that if we could not have any form of government that is truly accountable to the people, come 2017, Hong Kong will become ungovernable. So I don't know whether I have missed any part of your questions, Mike.
That's very clear. What you're saying is that if the LegCo did not pass this with a 2/3 majority, which is what you would expect to be the situation, then Beijing either has to go back to the beginning or there is an ungovernable situation. That, I think, is a summary of what you've just said. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alan, good afternoon. Hi there. The committee is looking specifically into the UK's response, or the Foreign Commonwealth Office's response, and whether perhaps one aspect of this is whether it has been robust enough in response to developments in Hong Kong, the pro-democracy movement. What is your assessment of that? Has the FCO in particular, or the UK government in general, been robust enough? Could it have done more? If so, what? And what could have achieved the greatest effect on the ground?
Yeah. Now, what I do not think the British government could do is to help us to get what we want, namely true democracy. It is really up to us to fight for that. But I am a little bit worried, and in fact I'm quite anxious when I heard the House of Commons debate just a couple of weeks ago. Am I right? I think it's about a couple of weeks ago.
2nd of December.
2nd of December, yes. And I can't remember who was saying this, but I heard a gentleman say that he was spoken to by a Chinese official to the effect that the Sino-British joint declaration had come to an end, and the joint declaration's effect have been spent come 1st of July 1997. That worries me.
That is correct. That is what happened, and it was part of the conversation when the Chinese deputy ambassador to the UK came to see me to tell me that we wouldn't be allowed into the country.
Oh, I see. So, I see. So you were the gentleman that I heard.
And I reported this conversation to the House when I opened the debate on the 2nd of December.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I haven't been able to recognize you. The picture didn't come through very clearly. But anyway, that worries me a little bit. Maybe it is an understatement to say a little bit. In fact, that worries me a lot. Because I do not think that the British should accept that as the position. You see, the joint declaration has an annex consisting of, if I remember correctly, my memory is serving me right, there are 14 heads in that annex. And it is not just about universal suffrage and election of chief executive. How can China suggest that come 1st of July 1997, this document, which is supposed to be the governing document that would last until 2047, suddenly came to an end. So, first of all, I think what the British really ought to do is to challenge this position taken by the Chinese government. Now, and I think what the British should and could do is really to keep a keen watch on developments in Hong Kong. And when people are talking about universal suffrage could really live with functional constituencies, then I suppose the British, as a people that has practiced democracy for so long, at least should be able to share your experience with Hong Kong and the Chinese government, and to take a clear position that functional constituencies cannot possibly live with the usually accepted definition of universal suffrage. You see, this is, I think, what you can do. And also, when you talk about the 6 monthly statements, I think it should also reflect more accurately on what had happened during the past 6 months, and to give a clearer and unequivocal view on what you had observed, instead of dodging the issue and beating about the bush. So I think that, because as I see it, the British has a duty that other countries do not have, because you are a signatory to the Joint Declaration, and the Joint Declaration certainly has not been spent yet. There are still so many tens of years to run until 2047. So, yeah, I think those are the things that I think of that the British could do.
Alan,
Thank you.
thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and I know you're a busy man, but we really do appreciate you coming in here, and we are full of admiration for the way that you are standing up for your rights and for human rights and democracy. So we wish you well. We'll be publishing our report early next year, and you've made a valuable contribution. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
OK， 你唱歌係啦，我諗佢哋要大概1-2分鐘 take a rest， 係啦。
等你嘅時候就走廊翻過去啦。
Good afternoon, good morning.
Good morning, afternoon. I'm only too sorry that we're not sitting across the table with you and having to do this by video link.
Well, it's a shame, but it's good to do it this way too.
Absolutely, you actually are now our last witness, and it's actually been quite effective over the last 3 days. So, anyway, thank you for coming along. Tim, are you aware that this is on the record and we're recording this?
I am, yes, thank you.
Great. Just out of curiosity, are you the sole representative of Chatham House out in Hong Kong?
Yes, I am. I'm the only person who sort of works for Chatham House who is here. There are others who are in other cities around the world in one capacity or another, but yes, I'm the only person here. There's no sort of formal office here, if you like. So I'm here as an individual, a stringer. If you want to put it in those terms.
Thank you. Look, you wrote a white paper which was actually published in July this year, arguing that the white paper from China didn't mark a shift in policy. Clearly, there were one or two people who disagree with that, but do you still stand by that position at the moment? And if so, could you sort of set out the force of your arguments?
Yes, I do stand by that position. That was my judgment when I first read the white paper. I think the day after it came out in June. I didn't publish anything until a little later, but that's my position. I think what it sets out is it sets out a number of things. The basic tenets of one country, two systems, as envisaged in the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. It sets out other things as well that are not reflective of the JD and the BL, areas where the central government says that it has helped support Hong Kong since the handover and so on. As I said in my original note, and the controversial bit was really the last section, which was an attempt, I think, to address varying different understandings and interpretations that have arisen in Hong Kong over the years. And I think that's what provoked the response and the reaction. But I don't think there's any fundamental change in policy or approach. I know you had a follow-up submission from Martin Lee and Anson Chan, sort of responding to the points that I'd raised. I must admit, I read that carefully. I don't think the points they raised constitute very strong arguments for suggesting the white paper is a change of policy. To start with, they were saying, well, the fact that the central government had issued a paper should be in itself seen as a change of policy, but I don't see why the sovereign power shouldn't issue a paper which contains no change in policy, so I don't find that very strong. There are indeed only a small number of references to the Joint Declaration in the white paper. That is correct, and I think it's fair to say that over the years, the Chinese side has emphasised the BL, the Basic Law, over the Joint Declaration, fairly consistently. If you like, that's the local implementing legislation for the agreement that was entered into, or the commitments that they made in the Joint Declaration. So again, I don't think that is really a change of policy. There's some other points which I touched on anyway in my original note, the references to overall and comprehensive jurisdiction, and I think these really are just simple statements of the political reality of China as a unitary state. It's not a federation, the ideas that there are sort of reserved powers or whatever in Hong Kong just fit in with the Chinese constitution. So they may not be very nice messages in a way for some people in Hong Kong to hear, but I don't think they reflect any fundamental change in policy. And then I covered in an annex to my evidence to you points about judicial independence and patriotism. So I won't dwell on those here. You can read my views. You might want to note that the issues of translation that I raised in my original piece on the white paper in July are not limited to those points that I made. There were one or two others as well, which I've highlighted some of those in the annex to you on issues concerning patriotism.
Thank you. You've been talking there about the white paper. We brought it out to the joint declaration. You wrote in your submission to us, you said that the Hong Kong people have been effective thus far in pushing back against perceived undermining of one country, two systems. From that, I presume you feel that there has been an attempt to undermine one country, two systems. This would seem to be consistent with the evidence that we've been getting that whilst there hasn't been any overt breach of the joint declaration, there has been a more subtle erosion of it. Is that what you meant by undermining the one country, two systems?
Not quite. I mean, perhaps I should just add on the white paper that, I mean, the key issue is implementation, in a sense, the white paper says, and your second question is moving us nicely onto that. I mean, I deliberately talked about perceived erosion because I think in many of those cases, the two cases in particular that I cited in the evidence, one was BL23 legislation, but Basic Law 23 legislation. The other, and perhaps the more pertinent one, is the National and Moral Education, which was originally proposed, I think, in 2007, but only came to really came to the forefront of people's minds in 2012. And it was pressure from students and parents in particular that pushed the government to shelve that. I think that could be perceived as, it certainly was perceived by many people in Hong Kong, as something that would undermine, if you like, or push the limits of autonomy, and in the best case, perhaps undermine Hong Kong's autonomy in the worst case analysis of that. And the point about that example is that the pushback was successful, and in this case the government shelved their legislation. I wouldn't subscribe to the view that there's been subtle erosion. I think what I would say, though, in response to that is two things. I mean, I think firstly, if we look at the system that was set up under the Joint Declaration, I mean, I really think at the system level, the record has been very, very strong indeed. You know, the financial, the legal system, the customs administration, and so on. All of those things spelled out in the Joint Declaration really being run very autonomously in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong in those respects is still hugely different from other cities in China. I mean, Hong Kong, in my view, having lived in another major city in China, clearly is not moving in the direction of becoming just another city in China. I think the more difficult judgment to make, and I do allude to this a little bit in my evidence, is whether there has been erosion under the table, behind closed doors. And to some extent, those judgments are just very difficult to make because by their very nature, we don't have a lot of evidence to work on. I feel Hong Kong is quite a sort of leaky place in terms of things coming out if people have been trying to push the boundaries. So I think the lack of real sort of concrete examples should lead us to quite a positive judgment in that regard. But I think the wise judgment, if you like, is to reserve judgment a little bit on that and see how events continue to unfold.
Can I throw a question to you that comes out of our evidence we've had from other people, some of the Occupy protesters, and also it came out elsewhere. Is there, in essence, in this issue, a cultural question of people with a Cantonese linguistic cultural background fearing that there is something coming in from the non-Cantonese mainland linguistic cultural, and so it's a kind of fear of a kind of cultural imperialism that's coming from the mainland, which makes people less Hong Kong Cantonese in the way that the society is run?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting line of inquiry. I think the way I would characterise it is that one of the things we've seen since 1997, which most people didn't expect, is a strengthening of Hong Kong identity. So I'd probably think of it more as an issue of identity politics than cultural, though of course culture is part of identity politics. But it's a Hong Kong identity that it's not solely about Cantonese, because there are Cantonese elsewhere in China and so on, but it's partly about the Cantonese language and the way that that's used, and you read something like the Apple Daily newspaper, the sort of written version of Cantonese that they use is unintelligible to many people in mainland China. So there's linguistic elements to this, but it's also identity in a more political sense, a sense that Hong Kong is different, that it has this different history, this separate system, and there's a lot of corruption in the mainland, for example. People don't want their city to move in that direction. They value, if you like, the strengths and the benefits of Hong Kong that have taken a lot of hard work to achieve, and I think pretty successfully been maintained over the years since the handover. So there's this Hong Kong identity, and therefore a great sensitivity to any perceived action that might dilute that or weaken that or challenge that. And over the last 10 years, because we've just simply seen more and more mainland Chinese coming here, shopping, doing tourism, and so on, this does have an impact on people's, if you like, their sense of security in their own community. And maybe that's similar to some other sort of migration stories in other cities around the world. But I think there's an important element there in the identity question.
Thank you.
Sandra.
Could I ask you about the protests now that they have essentially ended? Where do you think the political process of a reform will go from here?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I think one consequence of the events of the last 3 months has been to polarise opinion in Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong politics was already moving in a polarised direction before the summer. I think that's got worse since, one can date that to various dates in the summer. Let's say since the summer, that has got worse. And this makes achieving consensus more difficult. I mean, the technicalities of what needs to happen, which is a 2/3 majority in the Legislative Council in order to see any change pushed through. Otherwise, we're back to the 2012 status quo ante. And I think it's very difficult to see how that's going to happen just at the moment. Positions are very hard. Beijing, I think, has made it clear that it's not going to engage in any fundamental compromises, that the decision of 31st of August is there, and what happens has to be based around that framework. I think on the other side, I don't see any real indications at the moment from what are called the Pan-Democrat group of legislators of inclination to compromise either. So there is a very real chance that we'll end up with a stalemate, and therefore we will not see any change in Hong Kong's constitutional position in the selection of the chief executive in particular, and I think that would be a real shame. So a lot of hard work is needed from everybody to, I think, push the moderates, push the centre ground, and to try and work out ways in which consensus can be put together over the coming months.
And what about the students and the young people? How do you think they'll react if they feel that they've got no hope? Questions like that are very difficult to answer. I think partly because of there really is a diversity of views, even among students and young people. Some people obviously have joined the protests consistently. Others have gone, maybe once or twice for a couple of days. Others have been opposed. Generalising, I think the majority of the student body is supportive of the sort of umbrella movement. But I think views among the students and the youth are also diverse and divergent. From those sort of public leaders of the student movement, I think some of them have taken a very hard line on this. So whether they will compromise or not, I don't know. But the key question is, I suppose, what constraints their positions and their activism would have on the politicians, on the legislators. And I think over the last few months, again, we've seen the legislators a little quieter than we might have hoped. Actually, the debate has really been led from the streets, and that is making a political compromise more difficult, in my view. Interesting. More generally, how do you think China interprets its sovereignty over Hong Kong and the role that the UK should play in Hong Kong today?
Well, I think China's interpretation of sovereignty is in line with what's set out in the Basic Law and in more detail actually in the White Paper. I mean, the White Paper does give us a little bit more detail on Beijing's thinking in one or two areas than we've had for some time. I think. The bottom line, ever since Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher met in 1982, has been Chinese sovereignty over Hong Kong. That's the bottom line for the party and the central government. I don't think that's shifted. If that bottom line is guaranteed, then I think their objectives are and always have been to work as much as possible for prosperity and stability in Hong Kong. And if you like, that was the foundation of the Joint Declaration Agreement. Sovereignty is transferred, and then the two sides agreed to work together in the run-up to 1997 to ensure a smooth transition of sovereignty. What they think about the UK's role is. Obviously, has been the subject of many public comments over recent weeks, and I don't have any. In a sense, I don't have any insights that go beyond what people have said publicly. I think their view that's come out is that the UK's main obligations were fulfilled with the handover of Hong Kong in 1997. And I suppose one could argue the maintenance of the Joint Liaison Group for 2.5 years after that. That was what was set out. And they don't see the UK as having legal or moral obligations subsequent to that.
So would you think that banning the committee here from going to Hong Kong says about their attitude to the UK and UK-China relations?
My interpretation is that their main concern was that if you were to visit at this point in time with a very tense political atmosphere and perhaps people still on the streets, although they're not this week as it's turned out, that would provide support, that would boost the Occupy movement, that would strengthen the people who have been opposed to the NPC decision. I think that was their fear and their concern, and my reading is that is what lay behind their decision to say that you were not welcome in Hong Kong.
In truth, it's been made quite clear we're not welcome at any time, not just while the protests are going on. Indeed, they don't even recognise this inquiry. They call it a so-called inquiry. You've got a quick one on that.
Just brief one before, Tim, good afternoon to you. Before we come on to the UK's response to the present unrest, can I just come back to you on one of your answers you've given? Basically, your position is that the Chinese authorities have honoured so far the joint declaration, and yet here we have, in stark contrast, protests on the street. The joint declaration promised 50 years of basically guaranteeing, in many respects, the present freedoms that Hong Kongers enjoy, but clearly they do not feel that is being honoured. How would you, push back on that? Where would you say we were wrong, or they were wrong, more specifically, in their concerns?
Yeah, my position on the joint declaration is that I don't see any evidence that the joint declaration has been breached, and the specific issue at hand, the method of selecting the chief executive, I think is not inconsistent with the joint declaration. Like I think one or two other witnesses who've spoken to you, I'm sceptical about the sort of ICCPR Article 25 arguments. I think they're a little bit tenuous and I think difficult anyway for the UK to really position itself behind. I'm also sceptical about the autonomy argument. There's a sort of autonomy argument out there that somehow by making the decision at the end of August, Hong Kong's autonomy has been undermined because democratic development should be something for Hong Kong to decide. I think the Basic Law, when it comes to the chief executive, the Basic Law makes it pretty clear that any changes to that procedure have to be approved by the National People's Congress. So I don't see much in there. And so these quotes from Lu Ping from 1993 that you may have seen around. I think that they were anyway referring to Legco, not the chief executive. I think they're a little bit of a red herring. So I don't see any breach of the joint declaration. Of course, that doesn't. I mean, the second half of your question, if you like, is the more the more interesting one. I mean, why have people been on the streets? Well, I think I suppose people. People felt that the decision in August was much harsher than it needed to have been. I mean, the sort of proximate reason was reading the MPC decision. For those who read it, people thought, well, having a 50% threshold for nominations, for example, was very high. This kind of brought home to people that the sort of electoral arrangement for the chief executive that was envisaged was not one where everything would be left in the hands of Hong Kong people. And then I think underlying that, we have a number of sort of contributing factors: unpopularity of the Hong Kong government, some social and economic issues, a feeling, perhaps some of these identity politics, a feeling that Hong Kong may be increasingly being swamped by people from China. I don't think that the joint declaration itself was a very strong motivation for most people to go on the streets. And there's a very strong narrative that developed very fast that Beijing had not honoured its promises, that they'd broken the promises in the Basic Law. But I think when you actually read the Basic Law, it's pretty hard to agree with that judgment. But it was a good rallying cry for people to come onto the streets.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yes, can I take you to the UK government's response to what's been happening? As you're very well aware, the 6th monthly report published by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has never identified a breach of the joint declaration, and they consider that the rights and freedoms have been, which are protected in it, are being upheld. Is it your view that the FCO's assessment is a correct one?
I think at that level of analysis, yes, I think it is. I don't see any, as I've said, I don't see any breaches, or let's put it this way, I don't see any evidence of any breaches of the joint declaration. I think actually what we've seen over the last few months is a really striking example of the freedoms that people in Hong Kong enjoy. I mean, people have been able to protest, to sit on the streets for 2 months, to discuss whatever they want to discuss about Hong Kong politics and the election of the chief executive. I mean, it's a very vibrant society. It's a very vibrant debate, and it's a polarized one, but it's one that everybody's been talking about around Hong Kong over the last 2 months. So I don't see any major infringement of freedoms there. So I think that judgment is broadly correct.
The FCO say that one country, two systems continues to work well. Is that your view?
Certainly. I think let's start with a little bit of sort of historical answer to this. One country, two systems has worked well, and certainly worked well for the first 17 years after the handover. I think much better than most people expected, to be honest, in 1997. I think that one country, two systems has been or is being seriously challenged at the moment. I would not go as far as to say it's stopped working well or stopped working, but it is being challenged. We have seen over the last few months, we've seen clearly different interpretations of what one country, two systems means within Hong Kong and between Hong Kong and the central government. And in a sense, the white paper stimulated people to reflect on what they thought one country, two systems meant. So what degree of autonomy does Hong Kong enjoy? I mean, some people have said, including evidence to you, that people were promised that they could be masters of their own house after 1997. Then others will say, well, actually, look at the Joint Declaration. It says high degree of autonomy. It doesn't say full autonomy. So these differences in interpretation, I think, have really come to the fore over the last few months. So the question is, what happens next? Now, with those differences out there, I mean, you can see a scenario where they lead to more political fracturing in Hong Kong. And if the central government were to decide to respond to that by trying to push very hard in more of a one-country direction, then we may well see a threat to one country, two systems. At the moment, there's a good chance that won't happen, but this is a very crucial time for one country, two systems.
You're talking about it in the sense of the rule of law issues, I guess, and freedom of speech and media and so on. But isn't there another argument that the China, which was one of the systems in 97 or before, has been transformed economically into a different economic system, and is, although it's not the same as the Hong Kong system, is actually being eroded in that sense. Is that not true?
Well, I suppose actually, and look at what Deng Xiaoping said a number of times in the 1980s. Actually, I think on 4 occasions he said that after 50 years, the whole thing would continue and the wisdom would be there. And I think one of the assumptions was that by 2047, perhaps we would have seen integration in the sense that you're describing, that China will develop to the point where the difference between the systems was really neither here nor there. Yes, the transformation in China has been very substantial over the last 20 years. I still think there's a big system difference between Hong Kong and the rest of China, and partly based on my own experience living in China. I think you look at the legal system, you look at the way the police operate, you look at the judiciary, you look at government administration effectiveness, you look at the health service, you look at education, you look at almost anything. The media. I mean, almost all of those elements that were guaranteed, I think, very successfully in the Joint Declaration. Almost all of those elements do operate differently and noticeably differently in Hong Kong and mainland. Maybe there's some more convergence in the sort of economic sphere. I mean, that China now is more of a capitalist system than it was certainly in 1984 when the JD was signed. I do see some convergence in that sense, but at the moment I think the differences are still quite notable, which is why also I feel very confident saying one country, two systems is doing well, because living here and living in China, you really feel the difference between those two systems.
And will we still feel those differences all the way up to 2047, or actually is this process of erosion that the pan-democrats and the Occupy and the Umbrella Movement fear, is it likely that the 50 years will not be sustained, and in fact there will be a Hong Kong move towards the Chinese model rather than the other way much sooner than 2047?
Well, it's possible. I just don't see any evidence of that at the moment. And 2047 is a long way off, particularly in sort of Chinese, historical terms. But even if we go out 5 or 10 years, I just don't see evidence of the Hong Kong system moving noticeably in that direction. But a lot depends on how people respond, and people in Hong Kong and people in Beijing. And there is agency, there is the ability of people to do things that will change that picture. It's a question about the future, difficult to answer, but at the moment I don't see any evidence that is going to happen.
Thank you.
John. Tim, good afternoon again. I mean, the part of our inquiry is, as I said earlier, suggested earlier, looking into whether the UK government has been robust enough in its response to the recent protests, etc. I mean, what is your take on the UK government's response? How would you assess its been to these protests?
I think that the UK government should not become too actively involved in local debates where possible. I think that's a good principle to follow, that these issues are primarily for Hong Kong, people of Hong Kong, to debate and to decide. Where I do think the UK government should speak up and has a right to speak up is when issues specifically to the joint declaration. And there have been, they've never said the JD's been breached, but they have said in the past that the JD hasn't been breached in a couple of areas. And I think around 2008 there were issues over civil service reform and sort of austerity measures, and the consulate came out with a statement saying that they didn't think the JD provision on terms and conditions for civil servants had been breached by the changes the government were proposing at that time. And I feel, the assumption of your question is that the UK government hasn't been robust enough. Well, maybe if the UK government, spoke up, it might not actually speak more robust. It might speak more loudly, but in what I think you perhaps might be meaning would be a less robust way. I mean, in other words, the UK government might have said quite clearly at some point in this process over the last few months that the proposals put forward by the Hong Kong government and the central government are consistent with the joint declaration. That's a statement which has sort of filtered out, I think, in ministerial comments in Parliament, but rather sotto voce. And so that's something that the UK government maybe should have taken a clearer view on. Now, that of course would not have been welcome to the Pan-Democrats and the protesters, because it would have been contrary to their position. So I think the UK government, if it speaks up more, it has to speak up. It may well end up speaking on sides of the debate which those calling for it to speak up are not envisaging it would take. If I express myself clearly.
Tim, I take your point. I think it's fair to say, though, that the majority of the witnesses to this inquiry so far, the majority, not all, but the majority believe that actually the UK government should have been or should be more robust in speaking up for the democratic reforms. We have had a minority who've said otherwise and have been worried about the consequences on the ground. And I think that's fair to say. I mean, what do you think would be the effect of more vocal support for democratic reform? I mean, would it have any effect on at all? What should if the government was going to be more robust, how should it approach this? And perhaps more specifically, would it have a detrimental effect on the protesters in Hong Kong itself?
Well, I suppose the first thing I'd say, just because the majority of witnesses feel that there should be more robust statements in support of the demonstrators, doesn't mean that it's in the UK's interests to do that. And there's been a lot of talk about the UK's commitments, legal commitments, moral commitments. I mean, personally, I prefer to think of the commitments as political commitments. I think that's what Robin Cook made in 1998. When the first Foreign Secretary to visit Hong Kong, I think he made a political commitment to follow the implementation of the Joint Declaration. That's slightly different from a moral or a legal one. But there hasn't been a lot of discussion that I've seen about what UK interests are or might be in this. Now, would UK interests be served by taking a position supporting demonstrators or pan-democrats, it doesn't matter who, but supporting people whose line is inconsistent with the Basic Law? And the Basic Law being not a document that the UK negotiated, of course. I mean, we need to be clear about that, but one that came out of the Joint Declaration, and one that, effectively in the management of the handover up to 1997, the UK government accepted the Basic Law as being a good statement of China's policies after the handover.
Can I press you on that? I press you on that slightly, Tim? I can understand where you're coming from. You have a foreign office, if I may say, a foreign office background, and one can see why you're focusing on the political aspect of this. But basically what you're saying is you would take issue with those who argue that Britain has a moral obligation to ensure that our side of that treaty, it was a treaty at the end of the day, is being upheld. I mean, is that what you're suggesting to us?
Well, when you say our side of the treaty, You mean?
Well, it was a treaty signed by two parties.
Yeah.
And we accept our position. Our leverage was not as strong as it should have been, perhaps, or whatever. But that is history. But when you've got two parties signing a treaty, there is some believe an obligation on both sides to ensure that treaty is upheld. Now, you're talking purely in political terms. I can understand that. But, what about the moral obligation of ensuring that as far as we are able, and without being naive about this, we have a moral obligation on ensuring that the co-signatory, as far as is possible,